He said he didn't need anyone. But when she knocked on his door, the darkness inside him stirred. Montana Territory, autumn of 1879. The wind carried dust across the valley like ghosts searching for rest. The town of Stillwater Bend sat quiet beneath a pale sky, its wooden buildings worn by years of sun and storm. Smoke curled from a few chimneys, but most homes stood silent, their inhabitants long gone or too weary to make noise. At the edge of town, beyond the crooked fence line and the dried creek bed, stood a small cabin. It leaned slightly to the left, as if the earth beneath it had given up holding it straight. The windows were shuttered. The door was latched from the inside. No one visited. No one dared. Inside, Jonah Miller sat in the dark. He didn't need the lamp. What good was light to a man who couldn't see? His hands rested on his knees, palms up, fingers curled slightly. He could feel the calluses, the scars, the roughness of skin that had once gripped a rifle with certainty. Now they gripped nothing but air. 3 years. 3 years since the war ended. 3 years since the cannon fire had stolen his sight and left him with only echoes and shadows. He heard the wind outside, heard the creak of the cabin walls, heard his own breath steady and low. And then, something else. Footsteps. Jonah's head turned sharply toward the door. His jaw tightened. He didn't move, didn't stand, just listened. The footsteps stopped. A knock. 3 times, slow and deliberate. "Mr. Miller?" A woman's voice. Soft, but clear. Jonah said nothing. "Mr. Miller, I know you're in there." He stayed still, silent as stone. "I'm not here to bother you," she continued. "I just thought you might need help with the fence. It's leaning pretty bad out front." Jonah's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't need help, didn't want it, didn't ask for it. "Go away," he said, voice rough from disuse. Silence. Then the woman spoke again. "I'll come back tomorrow." The footsteps retreated. The wind swallowed the sound. Jonah exhaled slowly. His hands tightened into fists. He didn't need anyone. Hannah Whitmore stood outside the cabin, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. The wind tugged at her dress, but she didn't move. Not yet. She had seen him once, weeks ago, stumbling through town with a walking stick, his shoulders hunched, his face turned away from the world. No one spoke to him, no one offered a hand. They only whispered. "Poor man, lost his eyes in the war. Shame. He used to be a good soldier. Best to leave him alone. He doesn't want company." But Hannah had watched him, watched the way he moved, careful and deliberate, watched the way his hand traced the edge of the store counter, counting coins by touch, watched the way he turned his head toward sounds, always listening, always aware. And she had seen something else too. Loneliness. She knew that look. She had worn it herself. Her husband Thomas had died 2 winters ago. Fever took him in 3 days. She had buried him alone, dug the grave herself, because no one else would help. The town had called her unlucky, bad fortune, a woman cursed. So she understood what it meant to be invisible. She turned and walked back toward town, her boots crunching softly on the dry earth. Behind her, the cabin stood silent. But she would return. The next morning, Jonah woke to the sound of hammering. He sat up sharply, his hand reaching for the rifle that leaned against the wall. His fingers found the cold metal, and he gripped it tight. The hammering continued, steady, rhythmic, coming from outside. Jonah stood slowly, his bare feet finding the familiar grooves in the wooden floor. He moved toward the door, one hand trailing along the wall for balance. When he reached the latch, he paused. "Who's out there?" he called. The hammering stopped. "It's Hannah Whitmore, Mr. Miller. I'm fixing your fence." Jonah's jaw clenched. "I didn't ask you to." "I know," she replied. "But it needed doing." He pulled the door open, stepping into the cool morning air. He couldn't see her, but he could hear her breathing, hear the rustle of her dress as she moved. "I don't need your help," he said. "Maybe not," Hannah said calmly. "But the fence does." Jonah stood there, fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to shout, to tell her to leave, to stop pretending he was someone worth fixing. But he didn't. Instead, he turned and went back inside, slamming the door behind him. Hannah didn't flinch. She just picked up the hammer and kept working. By midday, the fence was standing straight again. Hannah wiped sweat from her brow and stepped back to admire her work. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold. She glanced toward the cabin. The door was still closed, the windows still shuttered, but she knew he was listening. She walked to the door and knocked once. "I'm done, Mr. Miller. The fence should last you through winter." No answer. Hannah smiled faintly. She reached into her basket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was fresh bread, still warm from the oven. She set it on the porch, just beside the door. "There's bread here if you want it," she said. "I'll be back next week." Then she turned and walked away. Inside, Jonah stood with his back against the wall, his heart pounding harder than it should. He waited until the sound of her footsteps faded completely. Then, slowly, he opened the door. The wind carried the scent of fresh bread. His hand found the bundle, his fingers brushing the soft cloth. He stood there for a long moment, bread in hand, the wind at his back, and for the first time in 3 years, Jonah Miller felt something other than anger. He felt confusion. And maybe, just maybe, something like hope. Hannah returned the following week just as she had promised. This time she brought a basket filled with jars of preserves, dried herbs, and a small tin of coffee. She set them on the porch without knocking, then walked around the side of the cabin to inspect the well. The rope was frayed. The bucket had a crack running down one side. She sighed softly and made a mental note to bring new rope next time. Inside, Jonah heard her footsteps circling the cabin. He stood near the window, his hand resting against the wooden frame. He couldn't see her, but he could track her movements by sound alone. She was humming, quietly, almost to herself. It had been so long since he'd heard someone hum. His chest tightened. "Why do you keep coming back?" he called out, his voice louder than he intended. The humming stopped. Hannah paused, then walked toward the front of the cabin. She stood just beyond the door, her hands folded in front of her. "Because no one else does," she said simply. Jonah's jaw worked. "I don't need pity." "Good," Hannah replied. "I'm not offering any." Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. "Then what do you want?" Jonah asked, his voice rough. Hannah considered the question. Then she said, "I want to help. That's all. I don't need help." "Maybe not," she said gently. "But maybe I do." Jonah frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Hannah looked down at her hands. Her voice softened. "It means I've spent 2 years feeling useless, and helping you makes me feel like I matter again." The honesty in her words hit him like a blow. Jonah stood still, his hand gripping the edge of the door frame. He wanted to argue, to push her away, to tell her she was wasting her time. But he didn't. Instead, he opened the door. Hannah looked up, surprised. Jonah stood in the doorway, his face shadowed, his eyes unfocused but turned in her direction. "The well rope needs replacing," he said quietly. Hannah smiled. "I know, I'll bring one next time." Jonah nodded once, then stepped back inside and closed the door. But this time he didn't slam it. Over the following weeks, a strange rhythm began to form. Hannah would arrive each week, always in the morning, always with something small, a new rope, a bar of soap, a bundle of firewood already split and stacked. She never asked for anything in return. Never lingered longer than necessary. She simply worked quietly and efficiently, then left. And Jonah, stubborn as he was, began to listen for her footsteps. He told himself it was because he needed to know when someone was on his property, that it was practical, logical. But deep down he knew the truth. He was starting to expect her. One morning Hannah arrived to find the door already open. Jonah stood just inside, leaning against the table. His hair was damp as if he'd just washed it. His shirt was cleaner than usual. "Morning, Mr. Miller," Hannah said, stepping onto the porch. Jonah nodded. "Morning." She set down her basket and glanced around. "Anything need fixing today?" Jonah hesitated. Then he said, "The roof's leaking near the back corner." Hannah looked up at the cabin. "I can patch it." "It's high up," Jonah warned. "I'm not afraid of heights." Jonah's lips twitched, almost like a smile. "I wouldn't know what that looks like anymore." Hannah's chest tightened. She stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Would you like me to describe it to you?" Jonah stilled. "Describe what?" "The view," she said. "From the roof. I could tell you what I see." For a long moment Jonah didn't respond. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right." Hannah climbed onto the roof carefully, her boots finding purchase on the worn shingles. She worked quickly, patching the leak with tar and wood shavings. When she was finished, she sat back on her heels and looked out over the valley. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks dusted with early snow. A hawk circled overhead, its wings spread wide against the pale blue sky. "Mr. Miller?" she called down. "I'm listening," Jonah replied from below. Hannah smiled. "The sky is the color of faded denim. The mountains look like they're sleeping, all wrapped up in snow. There's a hawk above us, circling slow and easy, like he's got all the time in the world." She paused, then added softly, "It's beautiful up here." Below, Jonah stood with his arms crossed, his head tilted upward. He couldn't see the sky, couldn't see the mountains or the hawk, but he could hear the warmth in her voice. And for the first time in years, he could almost imagine it. That evening, after Hannah had left, Jonah sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. The air was cool, the wind gentle. He thought about the way she had described the view, the way her voice had softened when she called it beautiful. He thought about the bread she'd left, the rope she'd brought, the quiet way she moved around his property, never intrusive, never demanding. She wasn't trying to fix him. She was just there. And somehow that made all the difference. Jonah took a sip of his coffee and leaned back against the cabin wall. For the first time in 3 years, the darkness didn't feel quite so heavy. The next week, Hannah arrived to find Jonah waiting outside. He stood near the well, his walking stick resting against the stone edge, his head turned toward the sound of her approach. "You're early," he said. Hannah smiled. "You're outside?" Jonah shrugged. "Figured I'd get some air." Hannah set down her basket. "Anything need doing today?" Jonah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I thought maybe you could teach me something." Hannah blinked, surprised. "Teach you what?" "How to walk," Jonah said quietly. "Without the stick?" Hannah's breath caught. She stepped closer, her voice gentle. "You want to walk without it?" Jonah nodded. "I used to know this land like the back of my hand, every rock, every tree. But now," he trailed off, his jaw tight, "now I'm afraid to take 10 steps without falling." Hannah looked at him, at the tension in his shoulders, the frustration in his voice. "All right," she said softly. "We'll start small." She held out her hand. Jonah hesitated, then slowly he reached out. His fingers brushed hers, rough and uncertain, but he didn't pull away. Hannah's hand closed gently around his. "Trust me," she said. And for the first time in a very long time, Jonah did. The first steps were the hardest. Jonah stood in the yard, his walking stick leaning against the porch rail, his hands hung at his sides, fingers curled tight. He couldn't see the ground beneath his feet, couldn't see the path ahead. All he had was the sound of Hannah's voice and the warmth of her hand in his. "Just 10 steps, Hannah said gently. "That's all. 10 steps to the well and back." Jonah's jaw tightened. "And if I fall? Then I'll catch you." He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that she wouldn't let him stumble into the dirt like a fool. But trust was a difficult thing for a man who had lost so much. Still, he took a step, then another. His boot found solid ground. His weight shifted forward. He moved slowly, carefully, his hand gripping Hannah's like a lifeline. "Good," Hannah murmured. "You're doing good." 3 steps, then 4, then 5. Jonah's breath came faster. His chest tightened. The world around him was nothing but sound and sensation. The crunch of gravel, the wind against his face, Hannah's steady presence beside him. 6 steps, then 7. Then his foot caught on a rock. He stumbled, his balance shifting violently. His hand jerked away from Hannah's as he tried to catch himself. But she was faster. Her arm wrapped around his waist, steadying him before he could fall. She held him there, firm and sure, until his breathing slowed. "I've got you," she said softly. Jonah stood still, his heart pounding. He could feel the heat of her arm around him, the strength in her grip. She was smaller than him, but in that moment she felt solid as stone. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "For what?" "For being useless." Hannah's grip tightened slightly. "You're not useless, Mr. Miller. You're learning." Jonah said nothing, but he didn't pull away. They stood there for a long moment, the wind moving gently around them. Then slowly Hannah guided him back toward the porch. When they reached the steps, Jonah sat down heavily. His hands rested on his knees, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Hannah sat beside him, and neither spoke for a while. Finally Jonah said, "Why are you doing this?" Hannah looked out across the valley. I told you. I need to feel useful. That's not the whole truth. Hannah was quiet. Then she said, my husband used to say I was too stubborn for my own good, said I never knew when to let things go. Her voice softened. Maybe he was right, but I can't just walk away from someone who's suffering. Jonah turned his head toward her. I'm not your responsibility. No, Hannah agreed. You're not, but that doesn't mean I can't care. The words settled between them, heavy and honest. Jonah exhaled slowly. People in town talk about you. Hannah smiled faintly. I know. They say you're unlucky, that you bring bad fortune. They say the same about you. Jonah's lips twitched. Guess we're both cursed then. Or maybe, Hannah said softly, we're just two people trying to survive. Jonah didn't respond, but something in his chest loosened, just a little. The town of Stillwater Bend had never been kind to outsiders, and to those who didn't fit it was even crueler. Hannah had learned that lesson quickly after Thomas died. The whispers followed her everywhere, at the general store, at the church, even at the post office where Mrs. Calloway would hand her letters with tight lips and cold eyes. Poor woman. Lost her husband so young. Strange though, isn't it? How sudden it was. Some people just carry darkness with them. Hannah had stopped trying to defend herself. What was the point? People believed what they wanted to believe. But now, as she walked through town with her basket on her arm, the whispers had changed. She's been visiting that blind man. The soldier, the one who lost his sight in the war. Why would she bother? He can't even see her. Hannah kept her head high and her steps steady. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. But when she reached the general store, she found 3 women standing near the entrance. They stopped talking the moment they saw her. Mrs. Calloway stepped forward, arms crossed. Hannah Whitmore. Hannah nodded politely. Mrs. Calloway. Is it true you've been spending time at Jonah Miller's cabin? Hannah met her gaze without flinching. I've been helping him with repairs. The fence, the roof, things he can't do on his own. Mrs. Calloway's lips pressed into a thin line. People are starting to talk. People always talk. It's not proper, another woman chimed in. A widow woman spending time alone with a man. Hannah's jaw tightened. Mr. Miller is blind, Mrs. Doyle. He needs help, and since no one else in this town seems willing to offer it, I will. The women exchanged glances. Mrs. Calloway leaned closer, her voice dropping. You're wasting your time, Hannah. That man is broken. He'll never be whole again. Hannah's eyes hardened. Maybe he doesn't need to be whole. Maybe he just needs someone who doesn't see him as broken. She stepped past them and into the store, her heart pounding. Behind her the women whispered, but Hannah didn't look back. That evening Hannah arrived at Jonah's cabin later than usual. The sun was already sinking behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She knocked on the door, then waited. No answer. She knocked again, calling his name, but still nothing came from inside. Frowning, Hannah pushed the door open. The cabin was dark inside, the lamp unlit. For a moment she thought he might be gone. Then she heard it, a low, ragged sound coming from the corner of the room. Jonah sat on the floor, his back against the wall, his head in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. Hannah's chest tightened. She stepped inside quietly, closing the door behind her. Mr. Miller, she said softly. Jonah's head lifted. His face was wet with tears, his eyes red and swollen. He looked away quickly, shame flooding his features. Don't, he said hoarsely. Don't look at me like this. Hannah knelt beside him. Like what? Like I'm pathetic. Hannah shook her head. I don't think you're pathetic. Jonah let out a bitter laugh. Then you're the only one. Hannah was quiet for a moment, then said, what happened? Jonah's hands clenched into fists. I got a letter today, from an old friend. He was in my unit during the war. He paused, voice breaking. He wrote to tell me that our captain died last month, the man who saved my life. He pulled me out of the fire, carried me on his back while the cannons were still firing. And now he's gone. Hannah's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Jonah shook his head. He saved me. And for what? So I could sit in the dark for the rest of my life? So I could be useless and alone? You're not useless, Hannah said firmly. Yes, I am. No, Hannah said, her voice stronger now. You're not. You're still here. You're still fighting. That means something. Jonah turned his head toward her, his jaw tight. Fighting for what? Hannah reached out and took his hand. For tomorrow. For the day after that. For all the days you haven't lived yet. Jonah stared at her, his breath shaky. I don't know how. Hannah squeezed his hand gently. Then let me help you. For a long moment neither of them moved. Then slowly Jonah's fingers closed around hers, and in the darkness of that small cabin, something began to shift. Not healing, not yet, but the faintest glimmer of hope. The weeks that followed brought a quiet rhythm to Jonah's life, one he hadn't known in years. Hannah came every few days, always with something practical in hand, a new shirt she'd mended, a jar of stew still warm from the stove, a bundle of letters she'd picked up from the post office on his behalf. But more than the things she brought, it was her presence that began to matter. She would sit with him on the porch while he drank his coffee. She would describe the changing colors of the valley as autumn deepened into winter. She would read aloud from the newspaper, her voice steady and clear, filling the silence he'd grown so used to. And slowly, carefully, Jonah began to let her in. He told her about the war, about the sounds that still haunted him at night, the screams of men caught in the fire, the thunder of cannons that never seemed to stop, even in his dreams. He told her about the moment he lost his sight, the flash of light, the searing pain, the darkness that followed, absolute and unending. Hannah listened without interrupting. She didn't offer pity or empty reassurances. She simply sat beside him, her hand resting near his, and let him speak. And when he finally fell silent, she said, "You survived. That's more than most men can say." Jonah shook his head. "Sometimes I wonder if it would have been better if I hadn't." Hannah's voice was firm. "Don't say that." "Why not? It's the truth." "No," Hannah said quietly. "It's what you believe right now, but it's not the truth." Jonah turned his head toward her, his jaw tight. "Then what is the truth?" Hannah reached out and took his hand. "The truth is that you're here, and as long as you're here, there's still a chance for things to get better." Jonah wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong, but the warmth of her hand in his made the words stick in his throat. So instead he just held on. One morning Hannah arrived to find Jonah standing in the yard, his walking stick in hand, but this time he wasn't waiting for her. He was moving. Slowly, carefully, he took a step forward. Then another. His free hand swept the air in front of him, searching for obstacles. His boots found the path uneven and rocky, but he kept going. Hannah watched from the gate, her breath caught in her chest. Jonah took 10 steps, then 20, then 30. When he reached the well, he stopped. His hand found the stone edge, and he leaned against it, breathing hard. Hannah walked toward him, her footsteps soft on the dirt. "You did it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Jonah turned his head toward her, a faint smile on his lips. "I fell twice yesterday. But you got back up." Jonah nodded slowly. "Yeah, I did." Hannah stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. "I'm proud of you." Jonah's throat tightened. No one had said those words to him in years, not since before the war, not since he was a different man. "Thank you," he said quietly. Hannah smiled. "You're welcome." They stood there for a long moment, the wind moving softly around them, and for the first time in a very long time, Jonah felt something other than darkness. He felt hope. But not everyone in Stillwater Bend was happy about the time Hannah spent with Jonah. One afternoon, as Hannah walked through town, she found herself face to face with Reverend Cole. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern face and a voice that carried like thunder from the pulpit. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, stepping into her path. Hannah stopped, her basket clutched in her hands. "Reverend, I've heard troubling reports," he said, his tone disapproving, "about you and Mr. Miller." Hannah's jaw tightened. "What kind of reports?" "That you've been spending time alone with him, unchaperoned." Hannah met his gaze without flinching. "I've been helping him, Reverend. Nothing more. Appearances matter, Mrs. Whitmore. You're a widow, he's a single man, people talk." "Let them talk," Hannah said firmly. "Mr. Miller needs help and I'm giving it to him. There's nothing improper about that." Reverend Cole's eyes narrowed. "You're putting yourself at risk, your reputation." "My reputation," Hannah said quietly, "was ruined the day my husband died. I've learned to live with that." The Reverend opened his mouth to respond, but Hannah stepped past him, her head held high. Behind her she could feel his disapproving gaze, but she didn't look back. When she reached Jonah's cabin she was trembling with anger. She knocked on the door harder than she intended. Jonah opened it, his head tilted slightly. "Hannah? I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to knock so hard." Jonah frowned. "What's wrong?" Hannah hesitated. Then she said, "The Reverend stopped me in town. He told me people are talking about us." Jonah's jaw tightened. "What did he say?" "That it's not proper for me to be here alone with you. That I'm ruining my reputation." Jonah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Maybe he's right." Hannah blinked. "What?" "Maybe you shouldn't come here anymore," Jonah said, his voice strained. "I don't want to make things harder for you." Hannah's chest tightened. "You're not making things harder. I'm choosing to be here." "But people are talking." "People always talk," Hannah said firmly. "I don't care what they say." Jonah shook his head. "You should care. You have to live in this town. I don't want to be the reason they turn against you." Hannah stepped closer, her voice fierce. "Jonah Miller, I didn't come here because I was looking for approval. I came here because you needed help. And I'm not leaving just because a few small-minded people can't understand kindness." Jonah stood still, his hands clenched at his sides. "Why do you care so much?" Hannah's breath caught. The question hung between them, heavy and raw. And then before she could stop herself she said, "Because I care about you." The words fell into the silence like stones into water. Jonah's face went still. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Hannah's heart pounded. She hadn't meant to say it, hadn't planned it, but now that the words were out, she couldn't take them back. "I care about you," she said again, softer this time, "more than I should, maybe. But I do." Jonah took a slow breath. Then carefully he reached out. His hand found her arm, then moved to her face. His fingers brushed her cheek, gentle and uncertain. "I can't see you," he said quietly. "But I feel you. Every time you're here I feel you." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "Jonah, I don't know what I have to offer you," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm blind, I'm broken, I'm not the man I used to be." "I don't want the man you used to be," Hannah whispered. "I want you, as you are, right now." Jonah's hand trembled against her cheek. Then slowly he leaned forward, his forehead rested gently against hers, and for a long moment they simply stood there, breathing together in the quiet. "I care about you too," Jonah said finally, his voice barely audible. "More than I thought I could care about anything anymore." Hannah smiled through her tears. "Then that's enough." Outside the wind picked up, rustling the trees and carrying the scent of pine and earth. Inside, two people who had been broken by loss and darkness held onto each other, finding strength in the space between words. Not perfect, not healed, but no longer alone. Winter came early that year, blanketing Stillwater Bend in thick snow and bitter cold. Hannah arrived at Jonah's cabin one morning to find him struggling to split firewood in the yard. His hands were red and raw, his breath coming in harsh clouds. The axe swung wildly, missing the log by several inches. "Jonah," Hannah said, hurrying toward him. "Stop. You're going to hurt yourself." Jonah turned sharply, his jaw set. "I can do it." "I know you can, but let me help." "I don't need help," Jonah said, his voice tight with frustration. "I need to be able to do this on my own." Hannah stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Why?" "Because," Jonah said, his hands gripping the axe handle, "if I can't even split firewood, what good am I?" Hannah's chest tightened. She reached out and placed her hand over his. "You're good for more than firewood, Jonah." Jonah's shoulders sagged. The axe slipped from his hands and fell into the snow. "I just want to feel useful again." Hannah moved closer, her hand resting on his arm. "You are useful. You're learning. You're trying. That's more than most people ever do." Jonah turned his head toward her, his face drawn with exhaustion. "I'm tired, Hannah. Tired of being helpless. Tired of needing you for everything." "You don't need me for everything," Hannah said softly. "You need me because you're not meant to do this alone. None of us are." Jonah was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "All right." Hannah picked up the axe and split the logs while Jonah stacked them. They worked together in silence, the rhythm steady and sure, and when they were finished Jonah's hands found hers, cold and rough but steady. "Thank you," he said quietly. Hannah smiled. "Always." That evening, they sat by the fire, the warmth slowly seeping back into their bones. Jonah held a mug of coffee in his hands, his head tilted toward the crackling flames. "Hannah," he said after a while. "Yes? If I asked you to marry me, what would you say?" Hannah's breath caught. She set down her own mug, her heart pounding. "Are you asking?" Jonah turned his head toward her. "Not yet, but I want to know if you'd say yes." Hannah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why do you want to marry me, Jonah?" Jonah's jaw worked. "Because I don't want to live without you. Because you're the only person who's ever made me feel like I'm still worth something." He paused. "Because I love you." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "You love me?" Jonah nodded slowly. "I do. I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was the first time you knocked on my door. Maybe it was when you described the sky to me, or maybe it was just yesterday, when you held my hand and didn't let go." He took a breath. "But I know I love you, and I want to spend whatever time I have left making you happy." Hannah reached out and took his hand. "Jonah Miller," she said softly, "I would say yes." Jonah's face went still. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his lips. "You would?" Hannah nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I would, because I love you too." Jonah pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her tightly. They sat there for a long time, the fire burning low, the snow falling softly outside, and for the first time in years, Jonah felt whole. The wedding took place in the spring, when the valley bloomed with wild flowers and the air was warm and sweet. It was a small ceremony, held in the yard of Jonah's cabin. Only a handful of people attended. A few neighbors who had quietly supported Hannah, the town doctor who had treated Jonah after the war, and Reverend Cole, who had finally come around after seeing the way Jonah and Hannah looked at each other. Hannah wore a simple dress of pale blue, her hair braided with flowers. Jonah stood beside her in a clean shirt and vest, his hand gripping his walking stick for balance. When the Reverend asked if he took Hannah to be his wife, Jonah's voice rang out clear and strong. "I do." And when Hannah said the same, her voice trembling with emotion, Jonah reached out and found her hand. He held it tightly as if afraid to let go. The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and the small gathering clapped, but Jonah and Hannah barely heard them. They were too focused on each other, on the warmth between them, on the quiet certainty that they had found something rare and precious. When the ceremony ended, Jonah pulled Hannah close and whispered, "Describe it to me. What does it look like right now?" Hannah smiled through her tears. "The sky is the color of hope. The flowers are blooming in every direction, yellow and white and purple. The sun is warm on our faces, and everyone here is smiling." Jonah's hand found her face, his fingers tracing the curve of her smile. "And you?" Hannah's voice softened. "I'm the happiest I've ever been." Jonah leaned forward and kissed her gently. "Good," he said, "because so am I." They built a life together, slow and steady, like the turning of the seasons. Jonah learned to move through the world with more confidence. He walked the paths around the cabin without his stick, his memory of the land guiding him. He chopped firewood with Hannah's help, and together they tended a small garden in the spring. Hannah continued to visit the town, but now she walked with her head high, no longer caring about the whispers. She was Mrs. Miller now, and that was enough. Some evenings they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset. Hannah would describe the colors to Jonah, painting pictures with her words, and Jonah would listen, his hand in hers, his heart full. One evening, as the sky turned gold and pink, Jonah said, "Do you ever regret it?" Hannah looked at him. "Regret what?" "Marrying a blind man." Hannah's hand tightened around his. "Never." Jonah smiled faintly. "Even when I can't see your face." Hannah leaned closer, her voice soft. "You see me, Jonah? Maybe not with your eyes, but you see me." Jonah turned his head toward her, his expression gentle. "I do." Hannah rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat there together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in shades of light and shadow. And in that moment, Jonah realized something he had once thought impossible. He was happy. Not because his sight had returned, not because his life was easy, but because he had found someone who loved him not in spite of his darkness, but through it. And that, he thought, was more than enough. Years later, when people in Stillwater Bend spoke of Jonah and Hannah Miller, they didn't talk about the blind soldier or the cursed widow. They talked about the couple who walked hand in hand through the valley every morning, the couple who laughed together on their porch in the evenings, the couple who proved that love didn't need eyes to see. And when the children asked how they did it, how they found each other in the darkness, the elders would smile and say, "Sometimes the heart sees better than the eyes ever could." And in the quiet cabin at the edge of town, Jonah and Hannah would sit by the fire, their hands entwined, their hearts full. Not perfect, not without struggle, but deeply, endlessly, beautifully whole. And the end. If this story of survival, courage, and unexpected love touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to Wild West Untold Love for more tales of redemption on the frontier. And if a moment or a feeling in this story stayed with you, we'd love to hear it in the comments below. Because sometimes the strongest souls are forged in the darkest places, and the greatest love stories